Well, here I am. I'm doing it. I've been dreaming of this moment for a really long time, and what I'm going to do... Hi, Kev. Hi, Mom. Hi, Alice. Alice, where are you? How can I see Alice? I got to be over here. There we go. Hi, Alice. I'm going to read a book that was published in 1989. It's called Spiritual Emergency. And lots of things happened in 1989, but the other thing that happened, at least in my life, is I guess I had something like a spiritual emergency. And I ended up, as a result of that, I ended up over in this world. This is the world I ended up in. Oh, hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. I ended up in this world. And it's one way to be in the world and look at the world. And I guess in a family of doctors especially, it's not surprising I ended up in that world. I'm not really angry, but if I could go back and start over, I might have liked to have done it differently than this. So, so this is an attempt, I suppose. This is a first attempt, like a draft in a way. This is an attempt to do it differently. And I thought if I read this out loud, I guess to myself to start with anyway, if I read this out loud and recorded myself reading it out loud, maybe that would be a first instance of taking back my story and starting a new one. And who knows, there might be a world in which other people would benefit from following along. So if you could just sort of roll along with this thing here. This is called Spiritual Emergency, when personal transformation becomes a crisis. It's edited by Stanislav Grof and Christina Grof. And I don't know, I have lots of different heroes in this world, but I suppose these two people are becoming pretty big ones. And so that's my intro. It's obviously not rehearsed, I can assure you of that. And here we go. We dedicate this book with appreciation to our beloved teachers who have guided us during our own journeys, to the many fellow adventurers who, over the years, have told us their personal stories, and to the visionaries throughout the ages who have forged the trails and provided the maps. Introduction. To your tired eyes I bring a vision of a different world, so new and clean and fresh, you will forget the pain and sorrow that you saw before. Yet this is a vision which you must share with everyone you see, for otherwise you will behold it not. To give this gift is how to make it yours. A Course in Miracles. Spiritual Emergency. The central theme explored in this book in many different ways by various authors is the idea that some of the dramatic experiences and unusual states of mind that traditional psychiatry diagnoses and treats as mental diseases are actually crises of personal transformation or spiritual emergencies. Episodes of this kind have been described in sacred literature of all ages as a result of meditative practices and as signposts of the mystical path. When these states of mind are properly understood and treated supportively rather than suppressed by standard psychiatric routines, they can be healing and have very beneficial effects on the people who experience them. This positive potential is expressed in the term spiritual emergency, which is a play on words, suggesting both a crisis and an opportunity of rising to a new level of awareness or spiritual emergence. This book is meant to be an educational reader for people undergoing such crises, for their relatives and friends, for the ministers whom they might consult, and for the therapists who treat them. We hope that it will help turn such crises into opportunities for personal growth. The concept of spiritual emergency integrates findings from many disciplines, including clinical and experimental psychiatry, modern consciousness research, experiential psychotherapies, anthropological field studies, parapsychology, thanatology, comparative religion, and mythology. Observations from all these fields suggest strongly that spiritual emergencies have a positive potential and should not be confused with diseases that have a biological cause and necessitate medical treatment. As we will see in this book, such an approach is fully congruent with ancient wisdom as well as modern science. The focus of this book is primarily, although not exclusively, on experiences that have an explicitly spiritual content or meaning. Throughout the ages, visionary states have played an extremely important role. From ecstatic trances of shamans or medicine men and women, to revelations of the founders of the great religions, prophets, saints, and spiritual teachers, such experiences have been sources of religious enthusiasm, remarkable healing, and artistic inspiration. All ancient and pre-industrial cultures placed high value on non-ordinary states of consciousness as an important means of learning about hidden aspects of the world and of connecting with the spiritual dimensions of existence. Long sentence. The advent of the industrial and scientific revolution dramatically changed this situation. Rationality became the ultimate measure of all things, rapidly replacing spirituality and religious beliefs. In the course of the scientific revolution in the West, everything, even remotely related to mysticism, was disqualified as leftover from the Dark Ages. Visionary states were no longer seen as important complements of ordinary states of consciousness that can provide valuable information about the self and reality, but as pathological distortions of mental activity. This judgment has been reflected in the fact that modern psychiatry tries to suppress these conditions instead of supporting them and allowing them to take their natural course. When medical strategies were applied to psychiatry, researchers were able to find biological explanations for some disorders with psychological manifestations. Many conditions were found to have organic bases such as infections, tumors, vitamin deficiencies, and vascular or degenerative diseases of the brain. In addition, medically oriented psychiatry found means of controlling the symptoms of those conditions for which no biological causes were found. These results were sufficient to establish psychiatry as a subspecialty of medicine, although no organic basis has yet been found for the majority of problems psychiatrists treat. As a result of this historical development, people who have various emotional and psychosomatic disorders are automatically referred to as patients, and the difficulties they are having are referred to as diseases of unknown origin, even if clinical and laboratory findings in no way substantiate such labels. Furthermore, traditional psychiatry makes no distinction between psychosis and mysticism and tends to treat all non-ordinary states of consciousness by suppressive medication. This development has created a peculiar schism in Western culture. Officially, the Judeo-Christian religious tradition is presented as being the basis and backbone of Western civilization. Every motel room has a copy of the Bible in the drawer of the bedside table, and in their speeches, high-ranking politicians make references to God. However, if a member of a religious community had a powerful spiritual experience similar to those that many important figures in Christianity's history have had, the average minister would send that person to a psychiatrist. During the last few decades, this situation has been changing very rapidly. The 1960s brought a wave of interest in spirituality and consciousness exploration that manifested itself in many different ways, from a renaissance of the ancient and oriental spiritual practices to experiential psychotherapies and self-experimentation with psychedelic drugs. At that time, many people became deeply involved in meditation and other forms of spiritual practice, either under the guidance of a teacher or on their own. Since such techniques are specifically designed to facilitate spiritual opening, spirituality became for many people a matter of personal experience rather than something they heard or read about. Since the 1960s, the number of those who have experienced mystical and paranormal states has been steadily increasing. As indicated by anonymous polls conducted by the minister and writer Andrew Greeley and by George Gallup, a remarkable proportion of the population now admits having had such experiences. Although there are no reliable statistical data available, it seems that the number of difficulties associated with spiritual experiences is also increasing from year to year. Rather than concluding from the apparent increase of mystical and visionary experiences that we are in the middle of a global epidemic of mental disease, we should reevaluate the relationship between psychiatry, spirituality, and psychosis. We are now realizing to our surprise that, in the process of relegating mystical experiences to pathology, we may have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Step by step, spirituality is making a comeback into modern psychiatry and into science in general. The popularity of the Swiss psychiatrist C.G. Jung, whose pioneering work represents a milestone in the new appreciation of spirituality, is rapidly increasing among mental health professionals on college campuses and in lay circles. The same is true for transpersonal psychology, a new discipline that bridges science and the spiritual traditions. Convergence between revolutionary advances in modern science and the worldview of the mystical schools has been the subject of many popular and professional books that have found large audiences. The healthy mystical core that inspired and nourished all great spiritual systems is now being rediscovered and reformulated in modern scientific terms. More and more people seem to be realizing that true spirituality is based on personal experience and is an extremely important and vital dimension of life. We might be paying a great price for having rejected and discarded a force that nourishes, empowers, and gives meaning to human life. On the individual level, the result seems to be an impoverished, unhappy, and unfulfilling way of life, as well as an increased number of emotional and psychosomatic problems. On the collective scale, the loss of spirituality might be a significant factor in the current dangerous global crisis that threatens the survival of humanity and of all life on this planet. In view of this situation, we feel that it is important to offer to people undergoing crises of spiritual opening and to create circumstances in which the positive potential of these states can be fully realized. However, it also seems necessary to issue a word of caution. Episodes of non-ordinary states of consciousness cover a very wide spectrum, from purely spiritual states without any pathological features to conditions that are clearly biological in nature and require medical treatment. It is extremely important to take a balanced approach and to be able to differentiate spiritual emergencies from genuine psychoses. While traditional approaches tend to pathologize mystical states, there is the opposite danger of spiritualizing psychotic states and glorifying pathology, or, even worse, overlooking an organic problem. Transpersonal counseling is not appropriate for conditions of a clearly psychotic nature, characterized by lack of insight, paranoid delusions and hallucinations, and extravagant forms of behavior. People with chronic conditions and long histories of institutional treatment who require large doses of tranquilizers are clearly not candidates for the new approaches. We feel strongly, however, that in spite of possible misapplications of the category of spiritual emergency, the benefits for those who are truly undergoing a transformation crisis are so significant that it is important to continue our efforts. The matter of discriminating between pathological conditions and transpersonal crises will be examined more closely in our opening essay, Spiritual Emergency, Understanding Evolutionary Crisis. Our interest in this area is very personal and is intimately connected with our individual histories. Stanislav began his professional career as a traditional psychiatrist and Freudian analyst. A profound experience in a psychedelic session conducted for training purposes attracted his attention to non-ordinary states of consciousness. More than 3 decades of research on and observations of the non-ordinary experiences of others and his own, induced by a variety of means, convinced him that the current understanding of the human psyche is superficial and inadequate to the task of accounting for the phenomena he has witnessed. He also realized that many of the states that psychiatry considers to be manifestations of mental diseases of unknown origin are actually expressions of a self-healing process in the psyche and in the body. It became his lifelong interest to explore the therapeutic potential of these states and the theoretical challenges associated with them. Christina's interest in the area of spiritual crisis also results from deep personal motivation. She experienced a spontaneous and completely unexpected spiritual awakening during childbirth, followed by years of dramatic experiences that ranged from hellish to ecstatic. After years of searching, she discovered that her difficulties accurately matched the descriptions of Kundalini awakening, a process of spiritual opening described in Indian sacred scriptures. Lee Sinella takes a close look at this phenomenon in Kundalini, Classical and Clinical, included in Part 2 of this book. In 1980, in an attempt to make the situation easier for others in a similar predicament, Christina founded the Spiritual Emergence Network, a worldwide organization that supports individuals in spiritual crises, provides them with information that gives them a new understanding of their processes, and advises them on available alternatives to traditional treatment. SEN's work will be described fully in Janine Privet's and Russ Park's essay, The Spiritual Emergence Network, in the final section of this book. The present volume is an integral part of our efforts. Here we present a collection of articles by various authors offering a new understanding of unusual experiences and states of consciousness and exploring their positive potential and constructive ways of working with them. The contributions fall into 4 broad categories forming the main sections of the book. Part 1, Divine Madness, explores the relationship between psychology, spirituality, and psychosis. It opens with our own introductory essay, Spiritual Emergency, Understanding Evolutionary Crisis, which outlines the subject of this book. It defines the concept of spiritual emergency, describes the different forms it takes, and discusses a new map of the psyche based on modern consciousness research that can provide useful orientation for people in spiritual crises. Roberto Assagioli, an Italian psychiatrist and the founder of an original psychotherapeutic system called psychosynthesis, was a true pioneer in the field of transpersonal psychology. Like Jung, he emphasized the role of spirituality in human life and formulated many ideas that are very important for the concept of spiritual emergency. His essay, Self-Realization and Psychological Disturbances, describing the emotional problems of preceding, accompanying, and following a spiritual opening, is a document of great historical value and of theoretical as well as practical importance. R.D. Laing has been for many years one of the most stimulating and controversial figures in contemporary psychiatry. Challenging both traditional psychiatry and Western society, he asserts that the sanity of our culture is at best pseudo-sanity, and that what is called mental illness is not true madness. Laing's contribution to this anthology, Transcendental Experience in Relation to Religion and Psychosis, is of particular interest since it expresses his attitude toward mystical experiences and spirituality. Yes, it does. Part 2, Varieties of Spiritual Emergency, focuses more specifically on the different forms of personal evolutionary crisis. John Weir Perry's Spiritual Emergence and Renewal discusses an important type of transformation crisis that reaches to the very core of the personality structure as he observed it during years of intensive psychotherapy with his clients. Perry also summarizes his experiences with an experimental treatment facility in San Francisco, where patients undergoing episodes that would traditionally be seen as psychotic were treated without suppressive medication. The paper by psychologist and anthropologist Holger Kalweit, When Insanity is a Blessing, explores the wisdom of the world's oldest religion and healing art, shamanism. Kalweit shows that certain forms of suffering and sickness have a potential for self-healing and transformation. An obvious fact among tribal cultures of all ages, this knowledge has been lost in modern Western society. The idea of Kundalini awakening, a dramatic and colorful form of spiritual opening, has become very popular in the West due to the prolific writings of Gopi Krishna, a pendant from Kashmir who had himself undergone a dramatic and challenging spiritual transformation of this kind. In our book, this subject is represented by the essay Kundalini, Classical and Clinical, by the psychiatrist and ophthalmologist Lee Sinella, who has the merit of having introduced the Kundalini syndrome to Western professional audiences. Here he complements the traditional point of view with a medical and scientific perspective on the subject. In The Challenges of Psychic Opening, psychic and transpersonal counselor Anne Armstrong describes the emotional turmoil and psychosomatic difficulties that accompanied the opening of her remarkable psychic gift and resulted in a dramatic self-healing. The problems of people who have had UFO encounters and experienced other forms of extraterrestrial contacts are so similar to those associated with transformational crises that these experiences can be considered spiritual emergencies. This subject is discussed in Keith Thompson's essay, The UFO Encounter Experience as a Crisis of Transformation. The third part, The Stormy Search for the Self, discusses the problems that spiritual seekers might encounter during systematic practice. Mystical literature of all cultures and ages offers many examples of the problems and complications that we can encounter when we embark on a spiritual journey. This theme is discussed by two well-known and highly competent spiritual teachers. Jack Kornfield's essay, Obstacles and Vicissitudes in Spiritual Practice, is based on the Buddhist tradition with occasional excursions into other belief systems. Richard Alpert, better known under his spiritual name Ram Dass, describes some of the fruits of his rich and fascinating personal quest, which has extended over the last quarter of a century in Promises and Pitfalls of the Spiritual Path. Part 4, Help for People in Spiritual Emergency, focuses on the practical problems of assisting individuals in psychospiritual crises. In our own essay on the subject, Assistance in Spiritual Emergency, we explore the different forms of help that can be offered by family, friends, spiritual teachers, and communities, and professional therapists. More than 1/3 of the people who undergo a sudden confrontation with death experience a radical and profound spiritual opening that might be very difficult to assimilate. Approaches for assisting this type of crisis are addressed in the essay Counseling the Near-Death Experiencer by Bruce Grayson and Barbara Harris, prominent researchers in the field of thanatology. While this essay focuses on professional helpers, the general principles the authors outline will be of no use to all who come into close contact with those undergoing any form of spiritual emergency. Paul Revelot's contribution, The Hero's Journey, Ritualizing the Mystery, introduces the mythological perspective and shows its relevance to the problem of spiritual emergency. Drawing inspiration from his own transformative crisis and from Joseph Campbell's classic work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Rebillo has developed a modern ritual where symbolic healing crisis is experimentally evoked through the use of guided imagery, psychodrama, music, and group play. The final paper, The Spiritual Emergence Network, is written by Janine Privat, current director of that organization, and by Russ Park, a doctoral student deeply involved with it. They outline the history and function of this worldwide network founded in 1980 by Christina to support individuals undergoing crises of spiritual opening. In the epilogue, we have tried to put the problem of spiritual emergency into the context of the modern crisis humanity is facing. We firmly believe that spiritual emergence, transformation of the consciousness of humanity on a large scale, is one of the few truly promising trends in today's world. The appendix provides suggestions for further reading for those who would like more information on the various issues explored in this book. Also included is an extensive bibliography on spiritual emergency and related subjects. It is our hope that this selection of essays will provide valuable information for those undergoing psychospiritual crisis and seeking understanding and treatment that supports the positive potential of these states.